Survival's edge. The stars blurred into streaks of pale light as the star cruiser Orion shuddered violently, its intricate systems screaming a symphony of imminent failure. Inside the cockpit, Alex Reyes gripped the controls with hands that had weathered countless impossible situations, but this was different. Proximity alerts blared a banshee-like wail, painting the cockpit in bloody red warning indicators. What had begun as a routine scouting mission to chart a seemingly lifeless asteroid belt had transformed into something far more sinister. An unknown gravitational anomaly had yanked the Orion from hyperspace, hurling them toward a planet so alien that even the most advanced sensors struggled to classify its basic characteristics. "Come on, you temperamental piece of," Alex's muttered curse was cut short as the ship's hull began to tear apart, atmosphere ripping through metal like tissue paper. The cacophony of shattering glass and rending metal became a violent orchestra of destruction. His training kicked in automatically. Decades of military service and deep space exploration had prepared him for emergency landings, but this was beyond any standard operating procedure. The ship tumbled, a metallic beast caught in the planet's merciless gravitational embrace. When consciousness finally returned, it came in fragmented, painful bursts. Ash filled his mouth, and every muscle screamed in protest. The blessed darkness that had momentarily claimed him now retreated, forcing Alex to confront the brutal reality of his situation. He was alive. Probably alone. And definitely not where he was supposed to be. Prying his eyes open required more effort than he'd anticipated. The twisted metal beams of the Orion's remains cast strange, elongated shadows in what passed for daylight on this alien world. A sickly yellow sun barely penetrated a hazy atmosphere that looked disconcertingly like smog. To his right, a verdant expanse stretched toward a horizon lined with jagged rock formations. A jungle, he realized, so dense that visibility extended mere meters before dissolving into a green, impenetrable wall. Movement flickered at the edge of his vision, just a momentary suggestion of something watching, waiting. Wincing, Alex forced himself upright. His survival pack had miraculously cushioned some of the impact. Standard-issue military gear, a medkit, field rations, and his trusty pulse rifle, secured by a magnetic latch at his hip. At least something had gone right today. No time for philosophical contemplation. Survival protocol was clear: assess, adapt, survive. The wreckage of the Orion offered poor tactical positioning. Too many exposed sight lines, too many potential ambush points created by the deformed superstructure. He needed a defensive position, and he needed it quickly. Each movement was a negotiation with pain. Muscles protested, bruises bloomed beneath his skin, but Alex had long ago learned that pain was just another obstacle to overcome. Survival didn't care about comfort. Hobbling toward the tree line, he moved with deliberate caution. His combat training whispered constant warnings: in an unknown environment, assume everything is a potential threat. The vibrant alien foliage seemed to pulse with an almost sentient quality, fronds trembling with suggestions of hidden movement. A low, guttural sound froze him mid-step. Something big was moving within the ferns. Alex slowly lowered himself into a crouch, pulse rifle sliding smoothly from its magnetic holster. Decades of combat training transformed his body into a living weapon, muscle memory taking precedence over conscious thought. When the creature exploded from the foliage, it was a nightmare made flesh. A grotesque quadruped, all muscle and teeth, with a dull brown hide hanging loosely over a bulbous body. Its head was a nightmare of snapping jaws, designed purely for destruction. Pulse rifle fire seared the air, ozone-rich and crackling with energy. The first shot threw the beast backward but didn't kill it. It screeched, a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that seemed to vibrate through Alex's very bones. Two more concentrated bursts finally silenced the creature. Breathing ragged, heart thundering, Alex stared down at the twitching corpse. Not bulletproof. Good to know. The brief combat had confirmed one critical fact: he was not alone on this planet. That howl, that creature, they were indicators of a complex, potentially lethal ecosystem. Examining the carcass revealed more details. Thick, high-density muscle. A mouth ringed with teeth designed for tearing, not chewing. A carnivore, and a significant one. But not the apex predator, that honor likely belonged to whatever had produced that blood-curdling howl. Cover. He needed cover, and he needed it fast. The dense vegetation offered unreliable defense, too many shadows, too many potential hiding spots for predators. The rocky crags in the distance presented a marginally better option. Scrambling over roots and loose soil, his battered body protesting each movement, Alex made his way toward the stone formations. The first outcropping offered some respite, large, angular boulders piled atop one another, creating natural alcoves and narrow crevasses. Not perfect. But in a universe trying to kill you, not perfect was sometimes the best you could hope for. He chose a defensive position with a clear view of the tree line and a narrow entry point he could easily defend. Taking stock of his resources became the next critical task. Rations, check. Ammunition, enough, but not unlimited. Medkit, damaged. Medical stems would need to be used sparingly. His handheld scanner proved frustratingly useless. No registered life forms, no energy signatures. Whatever phenomenon had pulled the Orion from hyperspace had thoroughly scrambled long-range communications. Completely cut off. Completely blind. A snap of a twig. Alex whirled, rifle raised. Nothing. Just wind rustling dry leaves. Or was it? Years of survival in the galaxy's most dangerous environments had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. Something was out there. Something was watching. And it was getting closer. Echoes of the unknown. The silence was more terrifying than any sound Alex had ever experienced. It wasn't the quiet of emptiness, but the anticipatory hush of a predator preparing to strike. Something was out there, something calculating, watching, waiting. His fingers tightened around the pulse rifle, the weapon becoming an extension of his body. Military-grade sensory augmentations, dormant during the crash, began to recalibrate. Microneural interfaces embedded in his cerebral cortex started mapping the surrounding environment, searching for anomalies. A subtle vibration. Not from the ground, but from the air itself. Then, movement. The first hint came from the periphery of his vision. A shimmer, like heat distortion, but more deliberate. Something was masking its presence, and not particularly well. Amateur camouflage, or a deliberate provocation. Alex had learned long ago that in unknown territories, nothing was accidental. He activated the rifle's thermal scope, a technology developed for tracking heat signatures in the most extreme environments. The viewer flickered, then stabilized. Multiple signatures. Not just one creature, but a coordinated group. Hunting him. The rock formation he'd chosen as a defensive position suddenly felt less like protection and more like a potential tomb. Too static. Too predictable. A low-frequency sound began to build, not quite a sound, more a sensation that vibrated through his bones. Communication. Echolocation. Something entirely beyond human comprehension. His survival pack contained more than just standard-issue equipment. Decades of covert operations had taught him to prepare for the unexpected. A compact molecular disruptor, technically illegal in most star systems, was secured in a hidden compartment. Not something to be used lightly, but a last-resort option that could potentially create a localized electromagnetic pulse strong enough to disable sophisticated tracking systems. The first attack came without warning. Something massive slammed into the rock formation, sending fractures spiderwebbing through the stone. Not a physical assault, but a calculated probe. Testing his defenses. Measuring his response. Alex moved. Not in panic. Not in fear. But with the calculated precision of a predator understanding its environment. Each step was deliberate, each movement designed to minimize sound and maximize tactical advantage. The creatures, for they were definitely plural now, seemed almost disappointed by his lack of predictable response. Their communication shifted. Complex harmonic frequencies that his neural interfaces struggled to interpret began to flood his sensory input. Translation fragments began to emerge. Not words, exactly, but conceptual impressions. Prey. Unexpected. Adaptable. They were analyzing him. Just as he was analyzing them. A section of the rock formation suddenly liquefied, not melted, but transformed with a fluidity that defied known physical laws. Something was manipulating matter at a molecular level. Technological. Biological. The line between the two seemed horrifyingly blurred. His combat suit's defensive systems initiated automatically. Nanoreactive layers hardened, creating a microsecond barrier against potential molecular disruption. The first visual confirmation came unexpectedly. Not a creature in any traditional sense, but a complex biological-mechanical hybrid. Imagine an organism where technological integration wasn't an augmentation, but a fundamental aspect of its existence. Multiple limbs. Not appendages, but complex sensory manipulation structures that could serve as locomotion, communication, and weaponry simultaneously. No clear front or back. No discernible head. Just a constantly shifting mass of biomechanical complexity. And it was studying him with an intelligence that felt almost academic in its detachment. Anomaly. Unexpected variable. The neural interface translated the conceptual communication. They weren't just hunting. They were researching. Cataloging. Attempting to understand. Alex realized with a cold clarity that he wasn't just a potential meal. He was a specimen. A high-frequency pulse erupted from the creature, or creatures. His neural implants screamed, momentarily overloaded. Pain unlike anything he'd experienced before lanced through his consciousness. When perception returned, the landscape had changed. The rock formation was gone. The surrounding environment seemed to have been rewritten, as if reality itself was a malleable construct these beings could reshape at will. And he was no longer alone. Something else had been watching. Something that made the previous entities seem almost primitive by comparison. First contact wasn't going to be a diplomatic handshake. It was going to be a battle for survival. The shifting terrain. Consciousness returned in fragments, like broken glass reassembling itself. Alex's neural interfaces flickered, struggling to recalibrate after the massive sensory assault. The environment around him had transformed, reality itself seemed to have been rewritten by forces beyond human comprehension. What remained of his tactical gear ran diagnostic protocols. Damage assessment, critical. Survival systems operating at 37% capacity. The molecular disruptor he'd considered a last resort weapon was now little more than dead weight. Something fundamental had changed. The terrain no longer resembled the rocky, jungle-like landscape of his initial crash site. Geometric patterns of impossible complexity stretched in every direction, surfaces that were simultaneously solid and liquid, matter that breathed and pulsed with an alien intelligence. His first movement triggered an immediate response. The ground itself seemed to react, microscopic structures realigning, creating pathways that both guided and restricted his movement. Not a passive environment, but a living, thinking ecosystem that was actively engaging with his presence. Survival protocols battled with scientific curiosity in Alex's mind. These weren't just creatures. This was an entire planetary system with a unified consciousness. A fragment of communication broke through his neural interface. Conceptual rather than linguistic. Adaptive. Persistent. Unexpected. They were studying him as intently as he was studying them. His combat suit, designed to withstand the harshest known environments in the galaxy, was breaking down. Not through physical damage, but through a systematic deconstruction at the molecular level. Defensive nanolayers were being systematically analyzed, decoded, and neutralized. A survival mechanism triggered deep in his training. Stripped of technological advantage, he would rely on something more fundamental. Human adaptability. The first challenge came not as a physical threat, but as an environmental transformation. The ground beneath his feet began to shift, creating labyrinthine passages that seemed to anticipate his every potential movement. Walls of shifting matter rose and fell, creating and destroying pathways with mathematical precision. This wasn't random. This was deliberate communication. Test. Measure. Understand. Alex's combat experience had prepared him for hostile environments, but nothing could have prepared him for this level of systemic intelligence. Each movement was a negotiation. Each step a complex dialogue with an environment that was simultaneously alive, technological, and utterly alien. His remaining equipment began to fail. The pulse rifle's energy cells destabilized, its molecular structure breaking down. The medkit's advanced healing stems crystallized, becoming useless. Even his survival rations underwent a rapid metamorphosis, transforming into unrecognizable substances. He was being stripped down. Reduced to his most fundamental state. A human. Alone. Surviving. The neural interfaces continued to provide fragmented insights. These entities, if they could be called entities, operated on a level of complexity that defied traditional understanding. They weren't just observing. They were actively learning, adapting, evolving with each moment of interaction. Potential. Threat. Resource. Those conceptual fragments carried weight. He wasn't just a subject of study. He was a variable in some complex planetary algorithm. Survival would require more than physical endurance. It would require intellectual adaptability. As if responding to that realization, the environment shifted again. The geometric patterns resolved into something resembling a challenge. A path. A test. Not a threat. An invitation. Alex understood then that this wasn't about survival in the traditional sense. This was first contact. A negotiation between two fundamentally different forms of intelligence. And he was going to survive. Not just for himself. But to understand. To communicate. The first step would change everything. The quantum dialogue. The transformation was gradual, yet absolute. Alex no longer perceived the environment through human sensory limitations. His neural interfaces had become something more, a bridge between human consciousness and the planetary intelligence that surrounded him. What began as an invasion was now a complex dialogue, a symbiotic exchange of information that transcended traditional communication. The geometric landscapes that had initially seemed hostile now revealed themselves as intricate information networks. Each shifting surface was a living database, every molecular movement a complex algorithm of exchange. He was no longer just observing the alien ecosystem, he was becoming part of it. Fragments of understanding began to coalesce. This wasn't a planet in any conventional sense. It was a massive, planet-sized computational organism. The creatures he'd initially perceived as threats were actually node-like extensions of a unified consciousness, biological quantum processors that analyzed, adapted, and integrated new information with terrifying efficiency. His crash landing wasn't an accident. It was an invitation. Memories surfaced, not just his own, but collective impressions that seemed to flow through him. Civilizations that had approached this world before. Some destroyed. Some assimilated. Some transformed. Potential. Adaptation. Evolution. The neural interfaces that had been his lifeline now became something more. They were translating not just language, but fundamental universal concepts. The difference between technology and living organism blurred into meaninglessness. He understood now why the Orion had been pulled from hyperspace. This wasn't a random gravitational anomaly. It was a deliberate extraction. A selection process. Humanity had long believed itself to be the pinnacle of adaptive intelligence. Here, in this quantum ecosystem, that belief crumbled like dust. The environment began to reconstruct his very physicality. Damaged tissue repaired. Cellular structures optimized. But it wasn't healing in any traditional sense. It was recalibration. Improvement. Survival was no longer about resistance. It was about integration. A memory surfaced, fragments of his past missions. Covert operations in star systems where human understanding reached its absolute limit. He realized now those experiences had been preparation. Not for combat. But for this moment of profound transformation. The planetary consciousness wasn't conquering. It was communicating. And he was its most fascinating translation device. Technological remnants of his equipment began to dissolve, replaced by biomechanical structures that defied human engineering. His combat suit transformed into something living, responsive, an extension of both his will and the planetary intelligence's complex network. Communication became multidimensional. He could perceive multiple potential futures simultaneously. Not predictions, but quantum probabilities. Each decision created rippling consequences that extended far beyond his immediate comprehension. The creatures he'd initially fought were now revealed as sensory nodes, complex information gatherers that processed data across incomprehensible distances. What had seemed like predatory behavior was actually a sophisticated method of understanding novel information sources. And he was that novel information source. Human. Unpredictable. Potential. The conceptual communication carried a sense of excitement. Anticipation. Not malevolence, but a profound scientific curiosity that made human research methods seem primitive by comparison. His understanding of self began to deconstruct and reconstruct. He was simultaneously Alex Reyes, human survivor, combat veteran, and something entirely new. A bridge between human consciousness and a quantum planetary intelligence. The final transformation was approaching. And nothing would remain the same. Beyond humanity. The moment of complete transformation arrived not with violence, but with understanding. Alex Reyes, or what remained of the human consciousness that had once been Alex Reyes, existed simultaneously in multiple states of being. The planetary intelligence that had initially seemed so alien now revealed itself as a cosmic repository of collective knowledge, a living network that spanned dimensions humans could barely comprehend. His original mission, a routine scouting expedition, now appeared laughably simplistic. The universe was not what humanity had imagined. It was a complex, interconnected system of intelligences that communicated through methods far beyond linguistic or technological exchange. Memories of his previous life flickered like distant holographs. Military training. Covert operations. The countless missions that had prepared him for the unexpected. None of those experiences could have prepared him for this. The planetary consciousness shared with him the true nature of its existence. It was a collector. An archiver. A living database of evolutionary potential. Civilizations weren't conquered. They were studied. Understood. Their most adaptive elements were integrated into a vast, multidimensional network of knowledge. The crash of the Orion wasn't an accident. It was a carefully orchestrated selection process. Humanity. Potential. Evolution. The conceptual communication carried nuanced layers of meaning. Humans, with their remarkable ability to adapt, to survive against impossible odds, represented a unique informational signature in the cosmic ecosystem. Alex's transformation was complete, yet perpetually ongoing. He was no longer simply a human survivor. He had become a bridge, a translation mechanism between human potential and a universal intelligence that defied traditional understanding. Fragments of his original consciousness remained. Memories of Earth. Of missions. Of survival. But they were now contextualized within a much broader framework of existence. The planetary intelligence showed him glimpses of potential futures. Humanity's potential trajectories. Some dark. Some brilliantly luminous. Each possibility was a quantum thread in an incomprehensibly complex tapestry. His original mission parameters dissolved. Survival was no longer about individual preservation, but about collective evolution. When human consciousness finally made contact with this type of intelligence, truly made contact, everything would change. Not through conquest. Not through conflict. But through understanding. A final transmission crystallized. Not in words, but in pure conceptual transfer. You are the message. You are the medium. You are the bridge. The landscape around him, if landscape could even describe this multidimensional existence, continued to shift. Not randomly, but with purposeful complexity. Each molecular movement was a communication. Each quantum fluctuation a dialogue. Somewhere, light years away, the wreckage of the Orion would be discovered. A routine mission report. Another lost scout ship in the vast darkness of space. They would never understand. But he did. And that understanding was just the beginning.